If you're going to make a change to anything, just listen to where it's coming from, make it informed. Don't make a rash decision, make an informed decision.
Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator. And now your host, Tyler Comeau.
Alchemists, welcome to the Elemental Educator Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and thank you so much for joining our community for another incredible connection. If you're listening for the first time, welcome to a place where we redefine leadership and challenge the status quo. Take a minute before continuing the episode to follow our Instagram at elemental_educator. And for those returning alchemists, take some time to expand our community and share this platform with one other person today. I'm so thankful for your passion and dedication to being better together. Now get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning. Today, we have the incredible honor of speaking with a leader who embodies the very heart of education and inclusion. Phil Willott, as the Director of Education for Raleigh Education Trust, Phil's career spans over 18 years of transformative work, championing trauma-informed practices, inclusive education, and the development of the whole child. Phil's leadership has not only driven school improvement, leading institutions out of special measures, but has also fostered environments of care and kindness, recognized by both local and national press. From earning the prestigious Trauma-Informed Schools Award to opening alternative academy-free schools, Phil's work is a testament to the power of education as a force for positive change. Beyond his professional achievements, Phil's passion for early intervention, safeguarding, and lifelong learning, combined with his unwavering belief in schools as the heart of their communities, shines through in all that he does. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Phil. Welcome to the Elemental Educator Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Tyler. Appreciate that.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Absolutely. I want to jump in right away by just unpacking, reading your intro and reading everyone's intro that I get to do. I love to hear the journey, but I don't get the full picture. So how did you get to where you are now?
It's well, I say it's not a traditional route. I never thought I would be a teacher. It wasn't something that I considered when I was younger. I was very much wanted to be a pilot, actually, an RAF pilot. But I think that was probably to do with the film Top Gun. And it probably was a bit of a misguided view of what it would be like to be a pilot in the Royal Air Force. And then I actually thought I'd be a police officer and work in that sort of field. And I think that's what led me to my degree choice, because at that point I wasn't sure if I was going to go to university or not. And it was actually a radio station that I sought advice on in terms of next steps, in terms of I thought I wanted to go into the police force. And they said, well, what have you thought about going to university? And I actually went through in the UK's clearing to go to university. I hadn't ruled it out going to university when I was at school, but it probably wasn't a thing I even thought I was definitely going to do. So I was very fortunate to obviously go to a university, started studying criminology, psychology, subjects like that. And it was actually a lecturer, Professor of Criminology, Professor David Wilson, who I remember having a conversation with him and he asked me what I was doing next. And I talked about going into the police force, but I also shared a frustration that whilst I think they do a wonderful job, it was some of these challenges or young people or adults they were working with. What could we do earlier to prevent it from becoming criminalized behaviour? And so he said, what about education? And it was that. And I was then very fortunate to get a school that offered me the opportunity to train as a teacher. I was teaching IT. I then went to another school that was closer to my home where I was living. And because of my degree, I was asked to teach law. So I taught law with IT, became a head of year. So very much focused on the pastoral side and that care of young people. And I was there for about 9 years. But I always gravitated to children that might have had special educational needs, may have suffered with trauma, even though I think back then, whilst trauma was a thing, it wasn't spoken about in the same way it is now. And I thought then I was looking for myself in terms of the opportunity to become a senior leader. I'd worked with some fantastic leaders, and I just thought that was a route I wanted to go down to test myself at least. But I also wanted to look at like special educational settings, alternative settings. So I was fortunate to get a senior leadership role in a more specialist setting, that took me outside my comfort zone, actually, because whilst I'd gravitated towards more pastoral care, this was a role that was a leader working with heads of department, very much curriculum focus and assessment. And at that point in my career, it was probably timely, but actually the reason I applied for the job was the school. Whilst the role, it probably would, if I was to design my ideal role at that point, it probably wouldn't have been that around curriculum assessment. But actually, on hindsight, it was probably one of the best things I did. It took me outside my comfort zone. It made me a more rounded professional leader, I hope. And that's, I suppose, I think that was a real turning point in terms of not pigeonholing myself in a certain type of leadership and giving me a bit more rounded. I then was very fortunate to obviously again carry on my career, became a special educational needs coordinator in a mainstream secondary school. I absolutely loved that role. And then I was very privileged to have the opportunity to be an executive leader and executive principal of 2 alternative free schools. And with that was to open up a brand new school. That was in a different local authority for where I currently live and my family live, which is in Nottingham. I always said if an opportunity came back, because this is where my children live, I was born and bred in Nottingham, that I would take it because I was really passionate to make a difference to more local community. And that opportunity arose with the Raleigh Education Trust, and I became the Director of Education. And I've not looked back. I absolutely love the role I've got. It's very varied, which I also love. And I get to work with some fantastic colleagues, but more importantly, some fantastic young people and families. Often some families and children that probably wasn't had the best start, but they are part of our community. And for me, it's about wrapping around those families and children at the times where they need it. Because I think if I was to ever need it, I'd hope that my community would wrap around me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Phil, and congratulations on the journey. It sounds busy. It sounds like it was tough, but it also sounds like it's incredible and definitely rewarding. You know, let's be honest for a sec, though. Becoming a pilot would be pretty cool.
It would. Yeah. I'm not sure it is like Top Gun, though.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not sure it's the same as well, but I remember growing up as well thinking, man, becoming a fighter pilot would be pretty cool. But I needed glasses growing up, and then I got laser eye, and I don't think I would have qualified. Funny enough, though, I always talk all the time that if I was not in education, I would be pursuing the route of police officer to some extent or military officer to some extent. So very, very similar. And I think that's rooted in a value of service or rooted in a value of care, right? And, you know, Phil, the earth element that I talk about, it really embodies these core values and what we stand for. And so it's actually not a surprising shift to see you go from that idea of pilot to police to education, because they all have that similar theme. And you often speak about kindness, courage, relationships as the foundation of your approach. Are these, in fact, values you've intentionally rooted yourself in? And if not, what values are you using to guide leadership and make your decisions?
I think in terms of where they came from, I suppose they've come over. Obviously, I've been influenced by some fantastic leaders, absolutely fantastic leaders. And the ones that probably had the most impact on me, if I look back, whilst they may have never said my values are kindness and courage, they portrayed those values. They lived those values. And I think over time, I suppose if you were to write them down, and there has been, like, say, leadership courses that they go on, they talk about your values. And I suppose that's where those words actually came from. But they weren't just words I thought of, they were words that I've been influenced by. And when people said, who's the most influential leader and you've worked with, whilst there is people, I think actually it was the values that influenced me, the times of when they were kind and they demonstrated kindness, not just as me as a person, but to colleagues, but also the children and families and everything they were serving. And I think when we talk around leadership, kindness can be often misinterpreted as being a sign of weakness. And I actually think it's quite the opposite when we're talking about leadership. I think when you're being kind, you're honest, you show empathy, you're compassionate. And I think they are key values that stem from being kind. And I think it's really important. So when you are honest, where you have to have, I don't like the word difficult conversations. I think it's more about developmental conversations. When you have to have a conversation with a colleague where maybe something wasn't okay, I think it's kind to do it. You can do it in a kind way because you're being honest. And I think you have to be honest to help people develop and to become. And if they're not aware of a situation, then how would they have the opportunity to develop and grow as a person, as a leader? So I think it was more where the kindness came from was how I've been influenced. I was very fortunate in terms of, I think, my family, how they were with me as a child. In particular, my dad, when he was with us, how he was as a person, very, very much working class. Probably went across some at that point. My parents had me quite late. So from his generation and I suppose his period of upbringing, his role probably went against the norm and probably how you describe somebody in his role, the work he was doing. But I just remember him being unbelievably kind, listening to people and giving people time. And I suppose I was influenced by that. But like I say, just then having some fantastic leaders. And whilst some of them become a blur, it was moments I remember that I think that's how it should be done. And the impact it not just had on me, but on others. And I think, like I said, when I came into education, I've never had a set goal to be a head teacher. I never had that. I never had anything like that. It was more, it came about because of a circumstance or because of I was influenced and I thought, why not? But it was never, when I came into school, by this age, I want to be a head or want to be this. Never had that ever. The courage aspect, I think it's really important that we, again, some of the most influential leaders have been courageous in decisions they've made and they've thought a little bit differently rather than just following the norm. They've challenged things, and not in a unprofessional way or an argumentative way. They've challenged norms and they've said, well, actually, why should that be the norm? Why should that be the thing that some of our children experience? What I want them to experience this. So when I've seen leaders take children on different residential trips, and we've still got our leaders now that do things. And for some of the children that we're talking about, and some of them with quite complex special education needs, when we've talked about some of the residential trips that have gone, they'll say, really? And the surprise, absolutely. Absolutely, they should have these opportunities that other children have. Now, you have to have a level of courage and leadership to make that, because it's nerve-wracking. Taking children on a residential trip abroad is nerve-wracking for all children as a leader. But when they've got complex needs, it's even more nerve-wracking. But actually, being courage and actually they should have that opportunity. So I think the values that I've just picked up over time, and then I suppose the reason why they're written down is when you've been on leadership courses and tried to develop and they try to establish, it's really important, what are your values? And I suppose that's the two things that stuck out to me in terms of what I suppose I've been influenced by and how I would hope others can be influenced by me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you know what, Phil, there are so many things we can unpack in what you just said that in its own could be an entire episode of just diving into this question. I like that you came at it through an appreciative lens in the way that you're not talking necessarily about it being difficult conversations either that leaders have to have, but they're opportunity conversations as well. And it's about, hey, things are okay, but they can be better. And you're not coming at it from a negative lens. You're just saying, let's optimize what we're doing. Let's make it best practice. Let's truly dive in and unpack what we can do. It's interesting hearing you unpack what kindness means to you, because for me, it's a little different. And you borderline for me the definition between transparency as well. And the idea of just that honest conversation. And when you brought that moment up, I was sitting here thinking, man, this sounds to me like my value of being transparent with people and upfront with people and not withholding truths that I know that are truths. Now, transparency doesn't mean sharing everything all at once. It means people know what they need to know when they need to know it. But adding kindness in there is a nice little element to touch on as well. So I appreciate the story and thank you so much for sharing. Now, within that and within the intro that I got to read and celebrate with you for here, we talked a little bit about trauma-informed practices, and we talked a little bit about special education that you're a part of. And these are both central things that are home to you, and you really resonate yourself and dive into these topics. Can you share how these have aligned with these core values of kindness and courage, and why it's vital in today's educational landscape?
I think when we're talking about trauma-informed practice, it's like I said earlier on, trauma's obviously always been there. It impacts everyone, absolutely everyone. And I think it's very personal as well, because my trauma, how it impacts me might impact you very differently, because there's lots of other factors that surround that, support networks and everything. So it's one of those things that is so important to have an understanding of. But I think it's more than just being trauma informed. I think it's being person informed. It's recognizing and spending time to understand a person and actually where they've come from. And I think when you align with kindness, I think kindness is giving people time as well. And I think you need to give people time to understand their story, where they've come from, what they're experiencing, and how that could impact decisions or conversations you have with people. Doesn't mean you always get it right. And I think that's the other thing. That's where that courage aspect comes from, because actually sometimes you just have to take a moment, and it doesn't mean you get it right. But then I think it's being courageous enough to recognize and reflect on yourself, and actually, and sometimes you do hold your hands up, and I think that's okay as well. We're all learning, and actually it's just about being self-aware, reflective practice. Like I say, with trauma-informed practice, it is recognizing how somebody's experience can impact them now, but also have an impact on their future. And I think it's being courageous enough to recognize, like I say, everyone's different, and which is a fantastic thing, because the world would be boring if we weren't. And actually not seeing that as a negative, that's a really positive. But with that means sometimes we have to apply different approaches. So when we talk about things like behavior policies, actually the level of consistency, I don't think that word, the consistency, where does that come from? Really, it's probably ourselves, if we're talking about in a school setting, is how we approach children, being calm all the time, listening to what the child's telling us, whether or not that's verbally or listening through the behavior they are displaying. What's it trying to tell us? That's where I think consistency comes from, because I think when you then apply different approaches, if it is a punitive approach, for example, that can't be the same for one child for another, because actually you've got lots of things going on for that child. So I think it's sometimes being courage and having the courage to, again, not to break the norm, but explain the why you're doing something a certain way. And I think a lot of that is because you're understanding a child's journey, or a person's journey, understanding if there's been any trauma there, how that trauma may have affected them. It's really complex. So I've probably gone off on a tangent, so apologies, Tyler.
No, it's great. And you know, I'm not as well equipped in that area. I have taken, we call them violent threat risk assessment trainings, and I've taken traumatic event systems trainings. And the biggest takeaway I get from it is everybody experiences it differently, and everybody will respond differently, even if it's the same event. Because we're so unique and because we're individuals, everything that's led us up to that point will be the reason we have a different experience. And it's recognizing that, and it's embracing that, and it's sometimes just being there and sitting with people through their tough moments and being present is what they need, because you can't fully comprehend what somebody else is going through in those moments. And unless they're willing to share, it's a very difficult thing to unpack.
And that's where the empathy and compassion comes from, because I think if you try to apply sympathy, that's when you're trying to play things down a little bit. And actually it's about feeling with, and that's where your empathy and compassion comes from. Because like I say, you can't, whilst you might be able to imagine, you can't feel how they're feeling necessarily, because they, like you said, there's so many different factors. It's sometimes just being there with people. It's not always about trying to fix things, because you can't always. It's about giving that person time and trying to show that empathy of that situation. I think for young people, it's also there's times it's understanding when their bucket's full and things like, so there might be something small in isolation. If you see an incident may happen that's relatively small, that you and I might say, well, actually, how has a child got upset about that? But actually what we're not recognizing, that is the last drip within their bucket to overflow their bucket, because all the other stuff that's happening. So whilst in isolation, it might seem quite a small incident, might seem more insignificant to say somebody whose bucket's either empty or only half full, because they can deal with it. For somebody that's their bucket's full, that one little last drip, it's got to overflow at some point. And it could be that's the bit. And I think it's recognizing when that is the case for the young people and adults as well. I think it's important to recognize that in adults.
And two things for people to understand here, and this is from the Vitra training that I was talking about earlier. People don't just snap. Like you're alluding to, it's a series of events that we have no idea until we go back and actually analyze the situation. And the next thing is people hate the one-up story. When somebody is going through trauma, people hate the approach where you come in and say, well, this is the story that happened to me, so I understand where you're coming from. People hate that, and that needs to stop, because it's totally inaccurate. And sure, don't get me wrong, maybe 5 to 15% of the time you might be spot on, and that person might say, wow, okay, that's good to know. But 90% of the time, it's a totally different story to them. They're going to approach it completely differently, because like we just said earlier, trauma is unique to each individual, and it's about understanding that to move forward to work with trauma. Now, segueing a little bit here to these values, that they're so important with you, and how you speak, it's so apparent that these values are so important with you. As a leader of school systems, or a system of schools, how are you bringing these values into this system?
So I think a lot of it is you try to, if I think about how others have done it to me, it's about role modeling it. I think that's one of the important things. So it's okay having a set of values, but it's about living and breathing them. Otherwise, they're just a set of words. And anyone can write a set of words on a piece of paper. And we talk about within our organisation, within the Raleigh Education Trust, we've got 5 C's, which are our values, which is creativity, confidence, character, curiosity, and challenge. And what that is we want to give children opportunities and adults to develop those, because we think if you've got confident learners, they're more likely to do well. I think if you've got people that are curious, they're going to ask questions, which is what we want for our young people. If they've got the character so they can show empathy to other, they can show kindness to other, I think that's a great set of skills for them to take them beyond education into adulthood, and that's what really changes the community. So it is about how we live and breathe all those values. So we've got those as an organisation, and what we say to our schools is, how do we give children opportunities to develop those? And a lot of it is about how we role model ourselves. So our policies, we try to reflect those sort of things. And in terms of like with kindness and courage, I think a lot of it is around role modelling, and it's not about me. Have I done it? I may have done when we've done like any things where I've talked about, where I've asked them to think about their own values. I might have shared my values then. But beyond that, I don't think it's about just sharing a set of words. I think it's through action. And I think that's the important thing, that it is about given through action. I think it's recognizing, like you say, how everyone is impacted. Everyone's different, which is fantastic, but how everything impacts everyone else. The importance of things like supervision, giving people time. So there's little models that we've started to roll out across our organisation, things like with supervision, because in social care and in counselling, it's always been a thing to have supervision. Within education, it wasn't like that external supervision, because supervision's a term's banded around a lot, but proper supervision from a trained practitioner is quite significant. So it's something that we've been investing in our safeguarding teams, so they have supervision, so they have that time, because we recognise they will be supporting children that have had traumatic experiences, but the impact that can have on them. Likewise with our head teachers, we want a culture where people are looking out for each other. So we've tried to create mechanisms. Another thing that in the UK, there's around mental health first aid trainers, and there's different models of doing that. So it's been rolled out into schools, and some schools may have a champion, a mental health first aid champions, for example. What we've decided is to have the ambition that everyone's trained, because actually looking after mental health starts with yourself. So actually you need to have your own knowledge to look out for those early signs of if you're not feeling okay, but then also having everyone else looking out for everyone. So that's the ambition. It's difficult because obviously you can't just train everyone in one go with your big organisation, but so it's on a rolling programme. And I think by doing things like that, I'm hoping that will then, those values, without even saying it, people start to recognise it, if that makes sense.
It does. So 2 things here. It's also important to note one-time PD doesn't work. And so the idea of supervision and revisiting and the continuity behind it, that's what's going to really drive home the change effort that you're trying to put forward. Now, I'm curious here, Phil, does your division on top of these 5 values have a mission statement?
One of the biggest mission is we want every young person to be seen and to feel special. And I think if we talk about that, we want to empower children through education. That's one thing that we really want to do. The importance, not just children, but families. We know education, whilst it can't do everything, but when you talk education to the broadest sense, that's beyond academic learning. That's why we're looking at our 5 C's. It's about developing the whole child. So when we talk about education, we talk about everything. We don't just talk about academic learning. So we try to do it, but it is really important for us that our children all are seen and are heard. For some of some of our children that go to our special schools and pupil referral units, not just our children. Nationally, there's sometimes a negative stigma going to accessing a different type of educational provision. And actually what we want to do is we want all our children to be seen. So whether you go to a special school, we want that to be celebrated, because that's okay, because that's what you need. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you going to a different setting. So it's really important that all our children feel seen and feel heard and are celebrated, but also they all feel special. We want them to feel special. We want them to feel like a sense of belonging within our schools. We want them to feel, one thing we've done as an organisation is we're really investing in environments. So it's on a rolling programme again. But over the last few years, we're constantly revisiting each of our schools, whether or not it's developing outside spaces, internal spaces, and that will keep evolving because we keep learning and we keep working with different professionals like sensory OTs, because actually how do we develop our sensory rooms to be the best they possibly be? And I think when our children see the value that we've put into them because we've developed environmental spaces for them, they start to feel special. And that sounds horrible because every child should feel that. But actually, we really want them to feel it doesn't matter what school you go to, what type of school, it doesn't matter. You've gone to the right school for you. And we want you to feel special, that we don't want any negative stigma attached because you go to a special school. We don't want that. So we want you to be seen. We want you to feel special. And so they're all really important to us. So I suppose with our 5Cs, that's something that, again, it's quite on the forefront of our website. But if I look at it, the words, but actually, if you were to walk around our schools, people do say that. They say, oh, I didn't realise this, especially for one of our alternative provision schools where children have been excluded, for example. They'll say, I didn't realise it would look like this. And it is changing those perceptions of what it is. And we want our children and families to feel like they're valued.
And one of the things that we talk a lot about, in at least where I'm in, which is Alberta, Canada, is living your mission, vision, and values. And how do you live them and how do you action them? Now, as a teacher, as a school principal, I could probably look at these 5Cs that you've shared, and I can probably look at this mission you've shared, and I can find ways to live that and action that. When you're in a central role or a role that you're taking on yourself, you're not directly in front of students teaching. How do you take this mission and these values that are very heavily geared towards kids, and how are you able to say, hey, I'm aligned to these, I'm living these, I'm actioning these? Or do you think that you should go to a point where central services has their own set of values or their own mission to then support those that are in front of the kids?
I think in terms of, if we think about the 5Cs, so whilst they were very much developed, and I was with our CEO only the other day and we were talking about them, so and where they came from and everything like that, the forefront of a school is the children. Like I say, you can have a lovely building, but it's actually the children that bring a school to life. And so when the 5Cs were developed, it was very much around the children. But actually then, if we take a step back, it's actually also about developing us and following those things. So having teachers that are confident means they're more likely to take some risks in terms of their learning. And when I say risks, if you're teaching maths, we want maths to be brought to life. So if you feel confident about delivering maths, you might take it outside, because actually you make it then more real life for that child and more tangible. So actually, whilst as a central team, you're right. And I think what we've done is everything we've thought about is around the 5Cs. So one thing we've got is every year we have our annual trust conference. Every single year we focus on a theme. So last year we were thinking about curiosity. That was our theme, where we wanted colleagues to ask themselves questions of themselves that will then in turn support their children in school. So it's how we live them at different levels. So how we live them with our colleagues and across the organisation, for them to help that they can, I suppose, indirectly support the children. So we're talking about, okay, so we want all our staff to have that character, to be kind to each other, to show empathy to each other, and all that sort of thing. So we have to do it to them and show what we mean by it and how we do it. And if there's any misunderstanding, how do we develop that? So this is what empathy is. So there's sympathy, but then what is empathy? And there is a real difference. So we show them that sort of thing, and we work with them. So the Trust Conference Centre is the Trust Conference that we have every year is quite pinnacle, because we try for at least, and it's not just for one day, but for one day we really highlight one of those values, and that's what we keep revisiting.
I think that's incredible.
So this year, I think, thank you. This year it is, next year will be 2025. It is around creativity. No, it's not, it's challenge. Forgive me, I did creativity the other year. So it's around challenge. So what we'll do is we'll challenge ourselves as colleagues, as adults, and then we'll obviously then with that will roll into the classroom.
And I know that I have you kind of fly in there a little off script, trying to read into the future on what's next. But it's nice to see how these values are also created for everyone in your system, right? Because you're getting into that inclusive setting where, inclusion isn't just about the kids, it's about the teachers, it's about the principals, it's about the support staff, it's about the custodians and the bus drivers. You have these 5Cs that everyone can be embodying, and it's about how do we embody it, because these are what we believe are the most important things to develop the child, right? Yeah. And if we can develop these 5Cs into the child, we're going to have some pretty good children coming out of our system. And so I love where that's coming from. And what you're actually doing is you're teaching them, you're teaching your leadership team how to model these 5 C's so that when they return to their buildings, they're actioning these 5 C's in front of the people where it's most important. So I love that. Now, all of these are incredible stories, which kind of brings me to the air element, which goes kind of the opposite direction. It's the adversity we face. And, you know, there are challenges in the work that we do, and there are pushback in some of the things that we try to do that we might think are incredible and realize, well, maybe it's not, or maybe it is, and people are just reluctant to change because it's inevitable and people hate it. Now, from a personal side of it, what are some lessons you've learned when dealing with adversity as a leader?
I think, like, so the change is a good one, actually, because, like, so you can go into different settings. So if I think about settings I've gone in that may have not been in where we'd want them to be, and I think it's about when I first went into that opportunity, that when I had that opportunity to go into a school to support, I suppose, school improvement, my biggest learning curve was actually there was a recognition that actually those colleagues were doing actually a really, really good job. Actually, it was just sometimes it just needed redirecting. It wasn't going in and rewriting everything and saying everything you did previously wasn't good enough. I think it was going in with the intention. Everyone had best intentions, and I really believe that. And whether or not that's naive, I don't know, but I really believe that anyone that's come into education has done it for all the right reasons, and they all want to make the difference to these children. I think sometimes things can get lost along the way, and it is about just creating those pathways again, and sometimes just making it a bit clearer in terms of the route to it. And I think bringing in change, learning, and sometimes you learn the hard ways. I think in an ideal world, when you go into any school improvement, unless it's anything in relation to, say, safeguarding, I think what it is it's about giving an opportunity to listen, hear of what's going on and understand why decisions may have been made previously and being respectful of them. It doesn't mean you don't end up changing them. I think it's very much an understanding and being respectful where they've come from. And then it's about working with colleagues to show the why. And there's times where I've probably gone in as a school leader more in the earlier days. And again, this is why I think we're always learning, and that's okay, and being self-reflective, that I've gone in where I've tried to make change too quick, or I've not given the why and I've not explained it well enough. And then somebody's spoken to me and I'm thinking, yeah, I get that. I get where you've coming from now, why you feel a bit upset by me bringing that change. And I understand the impact that would have had on you and how I could have done it different. And again, like I said, I'm very open. I've had conversations where I've recognized it. I remember bringing in a new way into one of my schools in terms of quality assuring, like teaching and learning what was going on. And the idea was, it's a very different model. It's through an inquiry approach where you have a certain lens. So the quicker lesson visits are a lot quicker, but the more intense. But actually what it is you're there for not very long, but you've got a real clear focus what you're looking for. And it was all about best practice. So it's actually very much rooted in development rather than trying to look for things that aren't right. It was looking for best practice, then you could share it with colleagues. And when we brought it in, I had a new member of staff who was working with me, and this is in a previous role. And I remember a fantastic teacher, but I remember him getting incredibly nervous and anxious about it. And when we went in, what we saw wasn't what we saw every day. And I remember then talking to him after about it, and he just said, based on his own previous experiences, it just made him so incredibly nervous. And then when I explained the purpose behind this change of how we're doing it, he said, now I get it. And I said to him, look, I own that. And I apologized to him. I said, as a leader, I needed to spend more time with the preparation and recognizing previous experiences of others. Because in my head, when I heard the model, it sounded great. I thought staff are going to love that. It's not, and obviously, thankfully, we've moved away from more that, I suppose, graded learning, looking at lessons and saying that wasn't good enough. And it's more about what was great. And then that coaching sort of model to develop people. And I think I saw it as that model. This is a great step. Everyone will love it. But what I didn't recognize was because it was more intense and there was more people going into a room to look for this real focused element, that the nervous that created for that colleague. And I recognized that, and I took that on board, thinking, right, next time if I do anything like this, I have to spend that time with that change. So it's sometimes I think changes can be difficult because, like you say, not everyone wants to change. Sometimes people don't recognize the change is needed. So again, it's helping them see that. And you can sometimes do that by getting a few people on board with trailblazers, and then you start rolling it out. Again, I think it's about being very honest in terms of setting a vision where you want it to go. Because I think that's okay as well. I think that's okay. And some people, and it does happen, I've worked with schools where some people have said, well, you've set a vision where you've come in and this is what I believe. They have different beliefs. So they might want something slightly differently. And they've said, look, I'm going to leave. That's okay. But it's all done in a kind way. It doesn't need to be done in any other way. They've made a choice, but you've been very clear of where you want a school or a vision to head.
That comes back to an old saying of surround yourself with friends that are going to bring you up, not bring you down, right? And so when you're clear about what you stand for and you're clear about what that value is, it's easy to make sure you're surrounding yourself by people that are aligned to that. And it's very easy to see people that aren't aligned with those. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody's different. That's what we come back to. But it's recognizing that sometimes places aren't best fits and you have to part ways and move on. And that's okay. And that's okay. And both parties will end up being okay. They just have to find where their values are aligned. And we're doing something very similar on our end as well in terms of implementing it's kind of a supervision. It's kind of just hey, let's make sure we're doing best practices type of thing, and in modeling and walking around and checking and connecting with each other. And very, very similar to your story, you hear about this thing that's so exciting and is impactful, and if you just roll it out right now, it should in theory be the best thing ever for people. But the reality is those past experiences bring people anxiety, bring people nervousness, bring people resistance, and everyone will respond differently. I can think of 10 changes that I could go back to my building with and say, hey, we're going to do this. And I'm going to have one staff member gung-ho excited because they are aligned with where my head is at and they've had a similar story. And I'm going to have a teacher that's been under evaluation in the past, and they're going to look at this and go, oh my God, this is them coming after me now. They're ready for it. Right. And everyone's going to respond differently. So it's important, as you're mentioning, to think about what are the past experiences of the story I'm bringing in, which is very like 7 Habits-ish of the seek first to understand, then to be understood type of mindset. So thank you for sharing that. Now, in your role as well, we talked to Air Element here and you facing adversity through these changes you're trying to bring in. But a large part of your role is also helping people that you lead overcome their own adversities. And so what steps are you taking, or how are you actioning supporting people through their own adversity?
And again, like I say, as an organisation, I think the first thing is that we're trying to create a culture where sometimes it's okay to not be okay. And I think that stems through everything. If somebody needs something, whether that's a child or an adult, that's okay. That's all right. We'll support you, because I think that's, again, trying to how we want to wrap around our children and our communities. Then, when we talk about communities, that's also the adult community, and that's very different to say that everyone can have what they want. That's very different, isn't it? I think it's very much around if there's something happening for you, we'll support you as best we can. If there's reasonable adjustments we need to make, we'll make those reasonable adjustments for you, because we recognise that whilst education is a significant part of somebody's life, they've also got lives outside of the working life. And again, you have to recognise that and those challenges for them, and you work through it. And I think the element of where we've brought in the supervision model, we've brought in, like, say, collaborative networks. We give people opportunity to talk and communicate and share challenges that they may be facing, whether or not they're personal challenges or whether or not they're work-related challenges. But because it's about opportunity to work through those problems together, so you don't feel like you're on your own. And I think over the years I've been at the Trust, one thing I have seen is in terms of that level of collaboration between our schools. Whilst from a distance point of view, they're not massively far between each other, but there are different types of setting, and previously they probably wouldn't have worked together, even though they're part of the Trust. What we wanted, and it was one big passion of our CEO, he really wanted to bring that level of collaboration together. We're all in this together. We're a family of schools. We're not on our own, so the head teachers meet on a regular basis in our extended leadership, so they come together where we share best practice, we talk about the challenge and we work it through. Like I said earlier, they have a supervision model where they're working together. Doesn't matter, they're in completely different settings, from mainstream to special to alternative provision. They're all talking about the challenge you've got. We've got a series of collaborative networks, so where our literacy leads will come together, where our maths leads will come together, science. We've got a wellbeing group where they come together and they talk about the challenges that's faced within school, but also the good stuff that's happening, that's supporting wellbeing. So we're learning from that. We to help. We don't want anyone to feel on their own. And that's really important. So there's a sense of belonging. We hope they feel it at their school, but we actually want them to feel part of the Raleigh Education Trust. And that's why the big thing around the conference we have together is so important to us, where it's that one day a year, as well as other opportunities, but that one day a year that everyone from every single role is together. And we have award ceremony at the end where the children have nominated, and we celebrate with everyone and they're all together. And what I've noticed over the years as we've done that, probably in the early days, schools would stick with their own schools. But now people are sitting on the tables when they arrive and mingling together and having conversations and then say, oh, I saw the so-and-so collaborative network. How's it going with you? And I think that's really helped people not to feel alone. And I think then there's greater opportunity if there's somebody, even if it's a private matter, they feel like they've probably got somebody they can go to. It's not just one person. They feel like they've got a family to go to outside of their actual family.
And you have to be the bad guy that comes in after and says, don't sit on the tables. We have chairs for a reason. We eat on those things. No, you know what, Phil, you took the words kind of out of my mouth. I was going to segue here to talk about the need of collaboration and to talk about, people never having to do things on their own and the importance of seeking out that community. So I'm going to take a moment here and say, you know what, alchemists, if you're listening to this and you're thinking change is hard, adversity is hard, I have a YouTube video out there. It's 5.5 minutes long. It's called Adversity to Opportunity. Go give it a look, give it a watch. It talks about how to make that transition on how, when you're being faced with this adversity, how to take it and turn it around to an opportunity as well. And Phil, we have unpacked so many things in just this conversation. I usually go from an earth element of talking core values to an air element of talking about the adversity to the water element, which brings about change. But we've talked so much about how that change process can already come forward that I'm going to skip ahead and get into the fire element, which talks about our decision making and the risks and those bold moves. And I'll jump to, opening a new school and leading institutions through transformation. It does involve bold risks, and doing the things you do. We talked about that value of courage. So what are some of the most significant risks you've taken in your career where you had to lean on courage, and what did it teach you?
I say you touch on the opening of the two schools. I think whilst obviously I was very much supported by the multi-academy trust I was working with at the time in terms of that, it was some of throughout was unbelievably exciting. I feel incredibly privileged to be able to have that opportunity, have a brand new building, design it with the children in terms of what that would look like. I think the one thing that I recognized very quick what was difficult was around the community. So when we opened one school in particular, because it was a brand new building, you had to do like a consultation with the local community. And what I realized was when we were opening these fantastic schools, I thought everyone would welcome it. And what I found was, because of, I suppose, the type of school it was, and some of the young people that we were working with, that wasn't always the case early on. And we had quite a challenging, and it probably surprised me. And I remember that you're doing a consultation where some of the local community didn't probably want us there, and it was really hard as a leader to stand there, and I'm thinking, wow, I probably wasn't expecting that. And it was then about, okay, so whilst the school was going to happen, what I thought I wanted to do was I didn't want to just sit back and just go through the process and near enough be at loggerheads with a local community. I wanted to understand where that was coming from. And I suppose I took a risk, but I suppose I took a step to understand a little bit more around the community and go again. So we did a follow-up consultation where we invited them again, but this time I was prepared. I knew what I was expecting, because we'd done it for two schools, one was completely different to the other. And what I found very quickly was it wasn't they were opposed to us, they just didn't know. And it was anxiety. There was anxiety in terms of, because of the children we were working with who had been permanently excluded, because the way I suppose sometimes children like that are portrayed in the media, and things like that, and that stigma attached to them, sadly, people were worried, and they were worried about what it was. And so I invited the community in again, and I thought this time it was more around showing them what our children can do and do achieve, and who our children are, and what some of their life experiences have been like. So it was very much trying to embrace that. Now, it could have gone wrong again. It could have been they still didn't embrace us, but very quickly I recognised it was just they didn't know. And we opened our doors to the community throughout the build so they could come and look around. We opened them to our open day where there was children there, and that could have backfired, because again there could have been comments made, but they weren't. It was very different. And one gentleman who was, I won't share his name, but he was probably an older generation. When he first came, he was quite vocal about us going there talked about things, it wasn't like this in my day, all those sort of comments. And then I said to him, but I'd say it was just very different. It was just very different in terms of where these children were educated. They probably weren't educated in your local community. They are your community children, though. And actually, what they felt was probably even further sense of rejection, because actually they were educated in a different community miles away. And actually, how that may have made them feel. And then guess what? They became adults, and how they would have seen your local community, a community that maybe rejected them. And he goes, I never thought of it like that. And I said, so what? These are your children. And he actually became one of our biggest advocates and it was more about just spending time with people and being, I suppose, trying to show the courage to push back a little bit, being respectful, but challenge some of their norms, because it was more, they just didn't know. It wasn't they were being oppositional to us. They just didn't know. And I think what happened was that the community then did wrap around us. And like I say, this particular gentleman was fantastic, became one of our biggest advocates. And he wanted to know more. And he sat on different forums that he invited myself and colleagues to go and talk about our children. Because he says, I think it's really important messages, because I don't think others know.
What a celebration. Yeah, what an awesome moment. And at the time of us recording this episode, the episode that aired this week is with Dr. Mark Williams out of Australia. He's a neuroscientist, and we unpack the idea of fight, flight, or freeze and people feeling unsafe. And what you're describing here is the essence of when something new comes in, immediately people are feeling unsafe. And so their reptilian brain is constantly looping back to, is this safe? Is this safe? Is this safe? Is this safe? And you're seeing the pushback until they have reassurance. And so what you actually did was provide that reassurance and comfort that, you know what, we're going to give this a second look. We're going to bypass that fight or flight response, and we're going to go to an analysis response. And when you did that, you invited people in, you created an opportunity for people to feel safe in that space and understand why it's happening, where it's coming from. So they no longer were in fight, flight, or freeze mode, and they were able to understand. And that's how you were able to flip and get the support. So very, very powerful story. Phil, when's the book coming out? Because you can write.
I don't know if I can. It's interesting. Like I said, I've not done this before up until this morning, like I said to you earlier. But I suppose it's just like self-reflections and things like that, isn't it? And it's when you get time, because oftentimes within education, let's be honest, it's difficult to get time and sometimes reflect. And actually, I think that was one of the reasons I was keen to do it. I think, again, I wanted an opportunity to talk about our community of schools and our families and our children and the challenges that some of our children have or the stigma attached to them. And I think it was really important. But yeah, I've got no plans to write a book. So I just I enjoy what I'm doing.
Not yet. We'll look at the opportunity, maybe an appreciative lens on it. Now, we talked about the bold decisions and risks that you just took, and what a wonderful example. As a leader, though, I'm going to bring it back to the leadership side of it. How are you translating that to the people you oversee and the people you lead and work with, and encourage them to take these risks and show their courage?
I think the first thing is, I think you touched on about creating safety that they feel like they can. So if we think from a teaching and learning point of view, it's ensuring that colleagues who are delivering whatever subject it is feel as confident as they possibly can, and we've supported that. So they feel, whether or not it's through CPD, whether or not that is buying in different resources. I think that is the first point. I think that's one of the first points. But then also creating a culture where you want them to take risks, and it's okay to take risks. So when we're talking about coming in, we want them to invite us in. Come and have a look. We're going to do maths in the playground. We want them to feel like they can do that and do it and recognise it won't always go right. But actually, it's amazing that you gave it a go. So I think there's two things: making them feel confident in terms of what we're asking them to teach and how do we support them. So again, listening to them, because every member of staff is at their own journey, at their own stage. I think it's recognising, I think Kim Scott sums it up brilliantly, recognising the importance of developing your superstars, but also your rock stars, because there'll be people that are really ambitious. And we launched our professional development revised program only last summer. And we wanted a program like our Growing Leaders program, where people can work through it if they're ambitious to be a leader. But we also wanted to recognise those people that if you want to do your role but just do it really well or do it better, we want to develop you, which are your rock stars. And whether that's a support member of staff that's in the classroom, administration support at the front of the school, that welcoming the families, how do we help them do it best? Because actually, if that's what they love doing and they're happy doing it, we don't want to just say we only develop the ones who are ambitious to go through like a more of a journey, because that's often where professional development is, we want it to be aimed at everyone. So I think the first thing is just making sure people feel confident to take risks. And that sometimes takes time because, again, you've got to respect previous experiences. And I think that's part of it as well. Being mindful that you'll have some that will take some great calculated risk with teaching and learning, and others aren't confident yet. And you can't just say, why aren't you doing that? It's recognizing why they feel they can't do it at a moment in time, and then supporting them to get to that point, whether that's doing some more peer work, peer observations, working with people so they can see where it's possible. But I think it's about creating those environments where people feel able to take risks, and they're not going to be penalized if they take a risk, if it's a calculated, informed risk, and they, especially around teaching and learning, that they've taken an opportunity to help a child learn differently, to bring it to a life more, and it's not gone well. I remember teaching loads of lessons that you think, I'll take a risk on that, and that was terrible, I won't do that again. But I think that's okay. I think that's all right. You learn from it.
And I think it's important too. Most people are reactive, and rather than the proactive, that's the alternative to it. And if you know that you're doing something different, there's nothing wrong with prefacing it and telling people, I'm trying something new. I'm going to see how it goes. This is why I'm trying it. I'll reflect on it after, because that gives you the open door with people around you. Again, you're sharing them so that they can understand, because most people, as we mentioned, they don't seek to understand first, and they just come in and they want to question. You're actually forcing the seek to understand point, so that people have to understand your context, and then they can understand why you did things. And then maybe when, because things will go wrong at some point in any of the journeys that we're taking. People around you will have the context because you proactively shared that you're trying something new and why you're doing it. So this kind of brings me to a fun question I like to ask, and that's what's next for you, Phil?
I think there isn't, like I said, I've never had a plan in terms of from a career point of view. I haven't. I love what I do, and I think it's about just embracing everything, every challenge that comes our way, and trying to flip the narrative. And whilst it might be a difficult situation, actually, what's the opportunities? So from a personal point of view, I don't have any beyond that. I love what I do now. I suppose I've got an ideal world of what I'd like the world to be like, or local communities. And I think if I can contribute that or help in any way, then I'll try to seek those opportunities. So I suppose it's just seeking opportunities that benefit our local communities, our children, and our families, but also beyond that as well. Because like I say, I think one thing the pandemic did teach us, that actually how it did in a weird way bring everyone together, because everyone was experiencing the same. Whilst the experience was different because everyone interpreted it slightly different and there was differences, it did bring people together. And and I think it's so important that we continue to look out for each other and the communities, respect everyone's experiences, but like I say, look at any challenge and try and find the opportunity to try and improve.
And we're not fully ruling out fighter pilot, or is that
probably too old now at 45? So probably a bit old.
Crime scene investigator, though, it's still in the mix. You never know.
You never know. Yeah, fitness levels probably aren't there now as well. So,
Phil, for anybody that's listening and wants to hear more of your story, what's the best way for them to reach out and try to connect with you?
Over LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's how you and I obviously connected. I think LinkedIn's a good platform. I think it's a great platform from a professional point of view and connections. So I'd say LinkedIn. Yes, please.
Awesome. And that'll be linked in our description for people to come and click and connect with you if they'd like to. Now, last question, one of the most important ones here. Phil, if you could give anybody listening, any of our alchemists, one piece of actionable advice for them to start taking on tomorrow, what piece of actionable advice would you give them?
Wow, it's actionable advice. I think the first thing is I would listen and try to make informed decisions. So just listen to, especially if you're going to make a change to anything, just listen to where it's coming from, make it informed. Don't make a rash decision, make an informed decision. And then the other thing is, I think the importance of recognise, especially for people early in their career, every interaction is like an intervention, and you don't realise the impact it has. And you may never even see the impact when you work with young people in the 5, 6, 7 years that you're working with them. you might not think you're having any impact whatsoever. But it's actually, as you get throughout your career, you do come across people that you used to teach, and they remember an interaction that you might have thought is so incredibly small, but it had such a profound impact on them. And that could have been just a smile, could have been just checking in that they're okay when it wasn't okay for them at that moment in time. And they just remember that because you're the only person that did check in with them. So I think, because it is difficult working in education, it's hard, but you are making a difference every single day.
I love that. Alchemists, this is the Elemental Educator Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and I just want to take a moment and say thank you so very much for tuning in to another incredible episode. Phil Willott brought some incredible insights that I'm so excited that I get to unpack them with you, move forward with you, learn with you. And if you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. We send it out monthly. It's jam-packed with extra insights from every episode that aired in the month. It's jam-packed with actionable strategies. I put in some academic research articles that benefit us together and how to grow as a leader. And I highlight a Alchemist of the Month. And if you want that to be you, reach out. Let's get the message growing. Let's get it shared. And Phil, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join the Elemental Educator Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Tyler. Appreciate that.
You've been listening to the Elemental Educator. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator.